So we're going to have a look at an article by a guy called Tim Bale today. And this is what I've been telling people since before the referendum. Look, if you hand over control to these Conservatives, it's not what a lot of you want, because a lot of these people who voted for Brexit didn't want, this continued globalism. Yet the guys who are most pushing for Brexit in the Tory party, like Jacob Rees-Mogg, are hyper-globalists. They want globalism on an untold level. They want to cut so much stuff that electorally they would never be elected. So Brexit to them is a massive excuse to do all this. And, you're handing the keys over to them. But yeah, so anyway. So this is a book by these guys that they released, and Tim Bale's basically gone into depth dissecting some of these stuff. So it begins the article. So it's a truth pretty much universally acknowledged that the reason the Conservative government has struggled to come up with an agreed negotiating position in the wake of the country voting for Brexit is that many Tories who campaigned for leave didn't really think they'd win the referendum. Even those who dared to dream were determined not to muddy their take-back control message by getting dragged into discussing precisely how they'd go about it. But there was another reason behind their reluctance to talk about what came next. The fact that the UK's departure from the European Union will necessitate a change to the country's political economy that risks proving as electorally unpopular as it will be profound. This is the love they dare not speak its name, at least until March of 2019, when we will suddenly likely start to be hearing a whole lot more about it. So, bookmark this, people, because this is what's going to happen to this country. And I said, look, even before, there was an article by a guy who basically said, look, if you give these people Brexit and the ability to take back control, you will hand the keys over to the most right-wing government in history, which is what you essentially have done. And get ready for the fallout that's going to happen. So, for the party's hyper-globalists, Brexit doesn't just mean Brexit. It means a leaner, meaner Britain, where costs, the financial and otherwise, of doing business are lowered in order to allow companies and the country to compete on the world stage. Which, in the EU, we were already doing that, by the way. But, our economy is slowly slipping. And not all of these Brexiteers wants to admit it, but we are. But hey, there you go. So this means cutting both tax and public services, state provision, and after all, it is deemed by its very nature to be a vested interest, inefficient and inferior to what markets can be enabled to provide. So it also stymies investment towards entrepreneurialism and creates welfare dependencies, as well as crowding out private and charitable sector activity. Brexit to them also means cutting what the true believers call red tape, which is all these regulations. As again, Jacob Rees-Mogg, he said it before the referendum, and then you'll notice he hasn't said it since, but he said it once, and then he didn't really mention it a whole lot since, about the bonfire of red tape. So, indeed, one of the main reasons for wanting out of the EU, as well as the opportunity to do trade deals of our own, is the desire to escape the imposed regulation that supposedly hobbles and handicaps us in a so-called global race. This is what I bring up to many people who often say this. What about, they'll say, oh, these EU regulations, they hold us back and we're able to do business. So I'm like, okay, how does it stop us? How are these regulations stopping us doing this? And all of a sudden, they can't say why it does. All they can say is, oh, it holds us back. Because it's rhetoric from these people who don't want to tell the whole truth about what they want to do. So no matter that the UK has a relatively easy hire and easy fire culture, it needs to be even more dynamic. So, as you said, Dominic Raab is in massive favour of this. This is what he even said. He said, look, employers should have an even easier time of hiring and firing people. So, what is this guide to how the UK can rebirth itself? Primarily, by learning not so much from European countries, but from Asian dynamos such as South Korea, Singapore and Hong Kong, as well as places such as Brazil and Israel. It is, and maybe the title tells you all you need to know, Britannia Unchained. Its authors are rising stars in the Parliamentary Conservative Party. True, a couple of them have a lower profile than others, although Kazawi Kettering is a parliamentary private secretary to the Chancellor, and Chris Skidmore has just been put in charge of a new policy commission set up by Theresa May. True too that one of them, the Leave cheerleader and disgraced former International Development Secretary Priti Patel, has recently crashed to earth, but the other two are definitely making their mark. The uber Thatcherite Liz Truss is now Chief Secretary to the Treasury, and hard Brexiteer Dominic Raab has just been appointed Secretary of State for exiting the European Union. Their recent rise to power does not represent the success of some carefully planned conspiracy to hijack the Tory party that was hatched in 2012, when their book was originally published, but it does provide strong clues as to direction it will take after 2019, presuming, of course, that the UK does actually manage to formally extract itself from the EU by that date. We need those clues precisely because those responsible for steering the Conservatives, and therefore the country's course from then on, have been so coy with the people in whose name the referendum was fought and won. This is more than a little ironic. It is also understandable, after all. There is little or no evidence from opinion research that their prospects for post-Brexit Britain would find many takers. This is even true among the famous 17.4 million who voted for Leave in 2016. Particularly among with the shrinking state, it also means an end. Which is, oh, hang on, there we go. Which in free marketeers are constantly, if credited, should do to migration targets. Does this disjunction between what the people currently say and what they say then they want, and what they supposedly need actually bother Tory hyperglobalists? Except Insosoft as it except insofar as it prevents them, at least for the moment, from revealing all. So no, the reason being that they are Leninists, in the same way that Margaret Thatcher, then the inspiration and icon, was a Leninist. Just like her, in 1979, they believed they know what we want better than we do ourselves right now. And just like her, they have a crusade vision whose details are insurmount as such as they've been fully worked out, are best kept under wraps until the time is right and we can be made to realise that hope, gratefully rather than grudgingly, that there is that there truly is no alternative. So, look, I've said this before, and it bears belief, because you've got to remember, Priti Patel was the person who went to Israel and decided that she was going to have her own, foreign position with Israel over the government's position with Israel, and it's madness. But all you have here are people who, as we've said, want massive hyperglobalism. This is not going to be good, and most of the voters are not going to accept it unless, you know, there is a massive failure, and that basically it's left as the only option. You know, oh, we have to cut taxes for the most wealthy. We have to cut the welfare even more than it is cut now. So, yeah, congrats, guys, because these are who have been championing Brexit. This is what they want to do. And if you don't believe me, go and get the book Brexit Unchained and read what they want, because you wouldn't want it. They propose in that book a complete and fully privatised NHS. That's what they want. They won't say it, but that's what they want. They don't want the government also involved in regulation. They want as little to no regulation as possible. And this is what people like Rees-Mogg and Nigel Farage are. They are laissez-faire capitalists. The government should not be involved in any form of regulation of the economy. And yet, the EU's, you know, regulation when it comes to the economy is really weak. Because as I've said before, you look at Eurosceptics from the UK compared to the rest of Europe on this topic. The UK Eurosceptics will always say that the EU regulations go too far, they're really bad for the economy, and so on and so forth. But you look at the European Eurosceptics who basically go, no, the EU hasn't gone far enough with these regulations. So there is a massive, really, disconnect between these two people. And even Wilder, the Dutch Eurosceptic, is a guy who basically says, look, the regulations in Europe do not go far enough. So, you know there is a massive disconnect between what they want and what we want. And as I've said before, look, you do not want to become like the Singapore of Europe, because all the policies that they would have to implement, no one would actually want to vote for, because they have huge implications of cutting, you know, the welfare state, which has been providing for so many people and has stopped people from, you know, falling to, you know, complete and total abject poverty, even though in many areas of the country that is where a lot of people are. Like I say, remember, you've got people like Jacob Rees-Mogg who refer to food banks as a wonderful charity to people. People shouldn't have to rely on food banks in order to feed themselves. We were perfectly able to somehow do that, and then obviously the Tory cuts come in, and literally you see the rise of food banks was the rise more the Tories cut. This is insane. But this is what people want, and you know, you had a couple of weeks ago actually, Priti Patel was on Question Time, and there was a guy who was saying, do we need to set up a royal commission for the NHS? And what a royal commission is it's spending public money to basically go to find out about the NHS. And you'll notice particularly her statements about the NHS are not about the lack of funding in the NHS, and particularly her on Question Time was all about waste. There's all this waste in the NHS. But here's the thing, you've got continuous doctors and nurses and people who work, you know, administering the NHS to basically make sure it can run, and basically said, we're running at such a skin skeleton budget, there can't be any waste. You know? But this is what, this is the talking point they want to use to justify giving the NHS a less budget and less resources. it's so that they can con you into thinking, oh yeah, the NHS does need less money, not more. But there you go. So, as Tim Bale says here, expect after 2019 for there to be calls from the Tory party about this, and that the real plans for these guys are going to, you know, come to the forefront. So, yeah. And I'm going to do a video on about, but this is what well, actually, no, I'm not going to do it, because I've already done it, really. This is what the coming Tory civil war will all be about. And it's really already started. The party has a massive fracture line, and Theresa May is literally the stitching between these two, trying to pull them together in some cohesive step. Yet they keep on doing that. So every time she pulls one side closer, the other side goes over there, and she's like, like that, constantly trying to pull them together, but they're not going to come together. As I say, yeah. So yeah, hyper-globalist, great UK. I don't want it. And I'm pretty certain a lot of these people who voted to leave don't want hyper-globalism. So, there you go.